test. Mic test. Okay, Assalamualaikum and very good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to meet all of you. My name is Humaira. I'm head of the youth panel. Our panel defines youth as young people aged between 15 and 35 years old. So before we begin, I would just like to get a sense of the audience demographics here. Can I get a show of hands? How many of you here are students? Okay, so we've got quite a number, huh? And how many of you are in the 15 to 25 age band? 15 to 25? Wow, so young. All right. 26 to 35. We've got quite a number. Okay, so I assume that the rest of you were either young ones or young at heart, right? Okay, cool. So I see that we've got quite a diverse audience in this room. And thank you so much for setting aside time on the weekend to attend this event. And of course, choosing to join the strongest panel in this convention, which is the youth panel. Thank you. Right, I am joined by Faris Rizwan, Farisha Ishaq, Kevin Siddiq Lim, and Khairul Rushdi. Let's give them a round of applause. So you'll get to hear more from them later. Okay, for now, let me take you through the program for the rest of today. As you can see, we've slightly overshot, but that's okay. So first, I'll be sharing with you the key findings from the research that we've conducted in the past year. Following that, we will get you into groups to brainstorm the solutions to the issues that I will raise in my presentation. We will then give you a short break before we reconvene for a dialogue session with our panel members. So I hope that you will stay with us till the end of the program. And during the panel presentation at the main hall after the lunch break, I'll be sharing with the audience the key points from our discussion and further unpack some of the issues and concepts related to youth development, concepts that I hope will trigger another national debate. Yeah, so those of you who are familiar with my works would know what I'm referring to. Right, so I will begin my presentation with this powerful image of a world leader who has juggled various national crises, and she is none other than New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. So this photo of her embracing a Muslim lady was projected onto the Burj Khalifa, the world's tallest building, shortly after the tragic mosque shootings in Christchurch on 15 March 2019. It was photographed at a reef laying in Wellington 2 days after the mosque attack. The honor is noteworthy given that Ardern's response to the attack had touched millions of Muslims throughout the world. So in a world led by hardened pragmatists, Ardern stands out as one of the few leaders whose empathy towards the less fortunate is genuine and not the product of public relations spin or political grooming. Wait, let me repeat that. And not the product of public relations spin or political grooming. Her activism and commitment to improve the lives of marginalized communities were evident way before she entered politics. Apart from being empathetic, which is a trait that is rare in public life, the fact that Ardern was only 37 when she was elected Prime Minister is also intriguing. And indeed, she is the youngest Prime Minister of her country since 1856. Elsewhere in the world, Sanna Marin, Finnish Prime Minister, became the youngest head of government at 34. So for Singapore to have young and arguably competent political leaders like Ardern and Marine, there needs to be a re-evaluation of our political leadership structures. And one way to do so is to examine how candidates are first co-opted into politics. So this brings me to the first theme that the youth panel is raising at this convention, which is Youth Leadership and Succession Planning in Community and Muslim Organizations, or CMOs for short. So we are using this acronym because the Muslim community is not homogeneous. It is also made up of different ethnic groups that cater to the needs of the local Muslim community. The other reason is that many of the issues faced by the Muslim community are also experienced by the wider society, hence they should be addressed collectively. So where reference to organizations that cater specifically to the Malay community is made, the term MMOs, or Malay Muslim organizations, will be used instead. So on the first theme, we aim to highlight the value of appointing young leaders of diverse genders ethnicities, and educational qualifications within CMOs, as well as the barriers to the appointment of young Muslims to the board of directors of these organizations. So ultimately, we hope to encourage youth of diverse backgrounds to aspire towards contributing more actively to society through leadership positions. Right, and there are several motivations behind this theme. So first of all, studies have shown that youth involvement and leadership in voluntary associations play a significant role in political socialization and directly influences long-term political participation. So for instance, a research done by Farland and Thomas from Stanford University, published in American Sociological Review, reveals how such associations influence political participation in adulthood. Through these associations, youth develop skills of leadership and public speaking and develop self-esteem that make entry to new fields of adult political activity less daunting. And indeed, in Singapore, board appointment in CMOs would often pave the way for political appointment. Politicians are usually co-opted into politics by first serving in the board of CMOs. But membership is often restricted, and most members are handpicked rather than elected by the masses. So this close structure is problematic when ideological homogeneity makes members susceptible to groupthink. And the board is also unlikely to have change agents coming from within. So this is something that needs to be reconstructed. Okay, so second, while some may argue that one does not necessarily have to be in a leadership position in order to make a difference to society or to pursue certain socio-political causes, we can take leadership cues from our Muslim prophets who viewed leadership as a means to achieve another goal, that is, as a means to call people towards righteousness and social justice rather than as a goal in and of itself. So the latter often happens when leadership is pursued for the sake of worldly gain or status. Hence, if leaders are appointed based on their genuine concern and dedication towards certain causes, then irrelevant titles can be made relevant due to the good that they bring with their work. Okay, so third, our research on the demographics of board members shows that there is a lack of youth representation, especially young Muslim women, in the board of directors of many MMOs in Singapore. So statistics provided by the Council for Board Diversity in Singapore also prove that MMOs are not ranked highly when it comes to gender representation. So there is a lot of value in appointing women to leadership positions. What you see here is just one of them. Others include the need to inspire and empower other women to leadership positions, to address issues affecting women in the community, such as misogyny and sexual harassment, and to improve workplace policies, such as reducing gender pay gap. Yet, the board of many MMOs are still dominated by men, especially older men. Okay, fourth, research has proven that if equipped with the necessary skills and critical social capital, youth from non-elite and non-professional backgrounds can also become legitimate political actors. So a study done by Sean Ginwright on Black youth who were members of Leadership Excellence, a community-based organization in Oakland, California, shows how critical social capital is facilitated by challenging negative notions of underprivileged Black youth as civic problems, but instead conceptualizing them as important political actors in public policy and repositioning them as key civic partners in community change efforts. So through group discussions with adults and political education activities, youth develop a political understanding about issues like racism and poverty and how these social issues shape their lives and communities. So in a similar vein, the youth panel aims to explore how we can make the board of CMOs more inclusive for youth of diverse social backgrounds for maximum efficacy and impact on society. I've mentioned this in some of my public talks, and I'll mention it again here. Efforts to promote the flourishment of Malay language and culture has to occur in tandem with Malay political development. Only then can we mitigate the prevailing issues that are still affecting our community today. While there has been an increase in consolidated leadership of Muslim youth leaders in Singapore, their role in advocacy, particularly in weighing in on issues impacting local Muslims and marginalized Muslims affected by various atrocities around the world, can still be strengthened. Okay, so with these motivations in mind, here are our research questions. We are interested to find out how diversity is championed along these social categories. What are some of the barriers to board appointment? And what are some of the challenges that young board members, especially young Muslim women, face while serving in the board? And how can we ensure greater diversity and inclusion in the structures of CMOs? Okay, so our panel employs a mixed methods approach in our research. So for this team, we carried out individual semi-structured interviews with current and former board members of CMOs, as well as short and informal video interviews with youth of different educational backgrounds in order to explore their attitudes towards CMO leadership. And in the reporting of select findings with the board members and underprivileged youth, we have used code identifiers to protect their confidentiality. But for the video interviews where consent has been given by our interviewees, we have cited their actual names instead. We reached out to more than 20 board members and leaders from different organizations. 8 responded to our invitation for interviews. In addition to that, we also conducted 17 video interviews with secondary, pre-tertiary, and tertiary students. The numbers may be small, but data saturation was reached quickly. Recognizable patterns could be discerned after several interviews. The interviews with the board members validated the lack of social diversity within many Muslim organizations. In fact, only one organization had a significant proportion of board members who are youth of diverse gender and educational backgrounds. Okay, on the question of barriers to the appointment of young Muslims to the board, some respondents attribute the lack of young board members to the perceived reluctance of the older generation of leaders to provide leadership opportunities to the younger ones. So as aptly articulated by a board member cited here, there's a lot of talk about young people not stepping up, but the older ones are not stepping aside. I'm not asking you to step down, I say step aside. And in addition to this, the perceived irrelevance of MMOs to Muslim youth also explains the lack of young leaders in the board. So as shared by another board member quoted here, whom we identify as B5, the board of many MMOs tend to discuss operational matters rather than broader and pressing community issues that capture the interests of youth, such as racism and gender inequality. We then asked our youth respondents on why they think some Muslim youths are not even stepping forward to volunteer or to engage themselves in these organizations. So the views shared by Haziq, which is a representative of those we interviewed, corroborate those of the board members such as B5. Then others such as Awais attribute it to the lack of awareness of the proper avenues to serve in these organizations. So indeed, majority of our interviewees could only name a few organizations when asked to list MMOs that they are familiar with, which is pretty sad. So perhaps the lack of ethnic diversity within MMOs, as well as the way in which events organized by MMOs are promoted to the public, may have solidified the Malay-centric character of these organizations to some youth, some of whom may have internalized feelings of racial inferiority by choosing to surround themselves with non-Malays in other youth organizations rather than their co-ethnics in MMOs. Okay, so in response to our next research question on the challenges faced by women who have served or are serving in the board, there is the perception among some female board members that their appointment to the board has largely been tokenistic. And this is affirmed by B7, who questioned whether her appointment was based on her capability or for the sake of gender representation. In addition to patriarchy and androcentrism, women who have served in the board have also experienced misogyny while serving in the board. So as shared by B5, due to the dominance of men with misogynistic attitudes in the board of her organization, sexist comments against women were seldom called out. So having shared all this, any leadership appointment comes with a huge responsibility, right? Responsibility to not just carry out duties that are meaningful, that are tangible or visible to society, but to be sensitive to the needs and feelings of the people we serve and work with. So as a prominent writer and orator from the US, Robert Ingersoll once famously said, "Nearly all men can stand adversity, but if you want to test a man's character, give him power." Here are some of the questions that we would like you to discuss during the panel breakout session later. I'll elaborate on this later, but for now, let's explore the second theme on structural issues affecting the mental health of youth. For this theme, we aim to explore any existing gaps in the provision of mental health services for youth and address systemic and structural factors that adversely affect their mental well-being, not just in the context of the pandemic, but also beyond. And we define compromised mental health as a state of well-being in which the individual cannot realize his or her own abilities, is unable to cope with normal stresses of life, nor make a contribution to his or her community. So despite the increasing amount of resources allocated to various social institutions, some youth still find it a challenge to get the help that they need, as reported by an article in Channel News Asia on 1st of May this year. And the barriers include the cost of treatment and long waiting times for appointment. And furthermore, current measures to tackle mental health problems often revolve around the resilience narrative, where those suffering from mental illness are expected to bounce back to their normal routines after experiencing moments that compromise their mental well-being. So this idea of resilience runs the risk of perpetuating the stigma related to mental health, that those who deviate from society's standards of success and who take a break from the normal routine of life are deemed weak. And the focus on individual coping strategy also absolves the state of the responsibility to address these issues systematically. So one example is an issue within the prevailing healthcare system, right? So an issue that is prevailing is the neoliberalization of healthcare in Singapore, which has increased the emphasis on individual responsibility at the expense of state welfarism, relying on market forces that dichotomize the system into public and private providers. So within this frame, a patient is only able to receive subsidized healthcare after obtaining referrals from doctors in the public sector, so meaning to say polyclinic doctors. So this means that the patient has to endure months of delay before he or she gets to consult a specialist. So with pervasive stigma surrounding mental illness, private insurance companies seldom provide comprehensive coverage, leaving citizens with limited options in seeking state-subsidized mental health care. And conversations with youth in Singapore also reveal that mental health issues are not just caused by endogenous factors, meaning biological ones. They are also deeply intertwined with socio-economic issues and broader struggles for social justice. So you have watched the theatrical play earlier. Some of the issues are exactly the same ones that we heard from our respondents. So studies have also shown that those from a lower socioeconomic status are more likely to be diagnosed with mental illness. So for example, a research done by my colleague at SGH, Wee Liang En, and his co-authors in 2018, which explores the link between staying in rental flats and mental health problems, highlights how the financial burden of rental flat dwellers who have to support large family units outweigh the social support for mental well-being for these dwellers, leading to an effect of greater anxiety. Hence, by examining structural gaps in our education, employment, and housing systems, our panel seeks to address the root causes of mental health issues among youth which have not received the attention it needs in public discourse. So on this theme, these are the research questions that we sought to address. I'll be flashing them again later. And in addition to the 17 video interviews with the same respondents, we also conducted 5 focus group discussions, or FGDs, with 15 youths from underprivileged backgrounds. So we define underprivileged backgrounds as those who are living in rental flats and who are receiving long-term financial assistance from social service agencies. Again, the numbers may be small, okay, and the findings may not be generalizable to the entire Muslim community, but they do corroborate some of the wider trends and issues in the broader society. And here is a breakdown of the demographics of our FGD participants in terms of gender, ethnicity, and marital status. And yeah, this is the breakdown in terms of employment status, educational qualification, and monthly household income. Okay, so for this convention, right, our panel is focusing on the structural, okay, rather than the endogenous causes of mental health. This is not to say that endogenous causes are not worth looking into. We do acknowledge the importance of examining these causes, but strategies to address them have already been discussed at length elsewhere, especially in healthcare institutions, as compared to structural ones. So that being said, I'll be sharing findings from our FGDs that reveal how structural issues, such as those rooted in housing systems, for the underprivileged, have contributed to mental health issues among our youth. So this excerpt, for example, affirms my point on the need to go beyond interventions that are focused on building the patient's resilience, okay, when it comes to addressing mental health issues. It also highlights how such issues are intertwined with socioeconomic ones that arise from the patient's lived environment, lived experience, okay, as reflected by the sharing of this respondent. His narrative also points to the need for our political leaders to show more empathy, compassion, and a deeper understanding of the plight of those like him who are struggling to make ends meet. So I'll give you some time to read this excerpt because it does capture some of the issues that are at stake. This excerpt in particular, right, underscores a critique of the ideology of meritocracy in Singapore, which may be good in theory, but needs some tweaking in its implementation, especially when it has naturalized some forms of inequalities and justified unequal outcomes in our society. Okay, I will now show you snippets of our interviews, okay, with some of the participants that capture their views on the challenges, okay, and barriers which may prevent youth from seeking help for their mental health conditions.
This confidence of the youth is really like a problem, especially when there's like the pressure from their friends or even from the society. Like there's sometimes a stigma, if you go for counseling, you're weak. Yeah, so the confidence is the challenge.
Some of the experience I've went through, when I entrusted in an adult, it's actually mostly school counselors that I faced this problem. When I open up to them about problems that I face, things that I thought about, and also when I feel unstable at school, they have the tendency to just make it a protocol to say, okay, my next step would be to tell the parents. What I notice is that I find comfort in some teachers that actually open up about themselves rather than the school counsellor that is provided in the school itself.
Provide them a safe space where they are away from everyone, where they are talking to your certified counselor or whoever lah. They have this personal space for whoever really needs help to just go there, and they won't get judged by any one of them.
Always like depend on the doctor. Not everything to your health, like according to doctor, is correct. If you go there like 1,000 times, it doesn't do anything.
So I think the cost of getting like proper help is also quite pricey. Even when you have the money, it's still a transactional thing like between like the psychologist or like the person who gives you help. So I guess to some extent, it's not the most beneficial, even if you seek professional help.
Okay, so during the panel breakout, I would like some groups to discuss what these stakeholders can do to provide better support for youth who are facing mental health challenges. And that breakout session is happening now. Okay, so what we're going to do is we will break you up into groups. Okay, groups 1 to 5 will be discussing youth leadership, whereas 8 to 12 will be talking about mental health. A facilitator has been assigned to each group, okay, to facilitate the discussion. So yeah, you are free to choose the theme and group of your choice. Some of you may already be in your group of your choice, so that's fine. Just stick to where you are. Yeah, you can feel free to shuffle around, okay, as long as each group does not exceed the maximum number of participants, okay, which is 10 per group. And this includes 1 facilitator and 1 note taker. All right, so we would encourage you to be in groups with people you haven't met before, okay, so that you can expand your networks. And all groups are given 1 hour, 15 minutes to discuss the questions. Please end the discussion by 11:40, 11:45. And yeah, okay. Before we go for the breakout session, let me share with you a few house rules to keep our discussion productive and on track. We would like everyone to engage in a discussion where you feel comfortable expressing your views, okay, while at the same time respecting those of others, okay, including those that may be different from your own. So please avoid using offensive or inflammatory language. It's okay to feel angry towards certain policies. Some of my research papers were written out of resentment, but please keep your conversations civil and constructive. Okay, so here's the list of discussion questions for your reference. You may proceed to the group of your choice now. So yeah, thank you very much, guys, and have a great discussion.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Uh, Thank you everyone for the awesome discussions. I had a great time speaking with my group and I'm sure you all had a great discussion as well. So let's start with the next segment.
Okay, so yeah, I hope that all of you had a great discussion. So I'll be sharing the key points discussed from your discussions at the main hall after the lunch break. And please note that whatever I'll be sharing with you is not exhaustive, but we'll be sure to incorporate whatever points in our post-convention report. Yeah, so yeah, as you can see, I'm wearing multiple hats today. I was the presenter, now the moderator, and later presenter again. Don't be surprised if I'm replacing Lawrence Wong as the guest of honor later. Okay, we will kickstart our panel dialogue with a short video featuring our youth interviewees, in which they share their views on what different stakeholders can do to help youth cope with mental health challenges. Okay, following that, I will invite our panel members here to share their views on the two themes. Okay, the sharing will take the form of a fire chat format where I'll ask them simple questions before opening the floor for questions. Okay, if you have any questions or comments on youth leadership or mental health, you may start posting them on Slido. We will flash the QR code after the video. Please keep your questions concise. All right. No questions? Okay, so if no questions, can we have the video, please?
I think from the school's perspective, what they can do is to take mental health seriously. From what I see sometimes when the youth says that they need some time off school because they are struggling from personal problem, they don't have the green light to go for it because they say, oh, they need a official medical record saying that you are struggling from mental health. But I don't think that is the right way to go because in the first place, confidence is the problem. So if let's say the youth can't find help, how you expect them to make their mental health problem an official problem? They know themselves better than the rest, right? So yeah, I think schools should take it seriously for the sake of their future and their well-being in the present.
Let the counselors or even teachers to go through a course where they will learn about psychology, having a workshop where they will talk about opening your mind, being flexible towards everything, what people feel, what people think, and also to understand where they are coming from. Because you might have to have a little bit of creativity where you can find an imagination that can actually relate to you. This is not only benefiting them because they also might be going through something, but it might be benefiting someone that they teach, they educate.
I think teachers should also be trained to spot early signs of mental health issues like anxiety or depression among their students because they spend a lot of time with these children.
I think that in school, they should have professionals who can actually diagnose youths with it, and not just a school counselor, because school counselors, they actually focus on different things and it may not suit the needs of youths.
Maybe government can help by having an exhibition or seminar about mental health issues, and also for parents to understand why students are having mental health issues.
Maybe the parents need to be more aware that these are real issues, and if not treated, it can lead to something more severe.
I recommend the society to try to go everywhere to do an interview with the students so that they would know which students are having depression right now, so at least they have a way or idea to help them. If they were to just keep it to themselves and let people come in by themselves, that wouldn't work because like I said, most teenagers, they wouldn't be daring enough to share their problems to others.
It's crucial for the society to have a safe space for these youth because not all places, for example, you go to a community club or you go for school, for example, you can have a safe space where you can just let out your thoughts and then like make yourself more positive. A conference, okay, um, so that like they can share out their thoughts and then they as a community they can come up with solutions so that they can help each other out in making their lives better or more positive life.
Okay, thanks for that. So, ladies and gentlemen, I am very honored to be joined by three good-looking and good-humored young men, and a gorgeous lady who will be joining us online because she is in the United States right now, probably going on a hike on the Appalachian Mountains. So please join me in welcoming our panelists. How are you doing, guys? Good. Yeah.
Good.
We've been burning our weekends just for this, right? Right, so let's kickstart the discussion on the first theme on mental health, since that's the issue that was just covered in the video. I'll pose the first question to Faris, right? So based on the video that we've just watched, one of the participants mentioned about the importance of providing a safe space, right, for the youth to articulate their concerns. So my question is, what would a safe space look like to you? What would be the characteristics of a safe space?
So I think first and foremost, there's a lot of talk about safe space. There's a lot of research done, for example, in workplaces where a lot of millennial youth, right, work and they demand psychological safety, right, in the workplaces where they can talk about, when they think about anything, right, they are free to speak their mind. They won't be penalized for it. They won't be chastised for it. Their promotional track won't be suddenly disrupted. All these kind of things, right, at the workplace. You can talk about emotional and psychological safety at schools as well, right? Not only among students, right, that students feel that there's rapport, that there's trust, that there is a kind of openness where they won't be penalized or stigmatized if they raise certain issues that might portray them in a certain way, all right? But also, the teachers have to get acclimatized to psychological safety of safe space, right? So one issue that was brought up by one of my group members was that even the mental health professionals and even teachers who interface with students or youth who face mental health issues, right? If these mental health professionals and these teachers are not exposed to psychologically safe spaces in the first place, right? They're not used to the culture of a safe space. How can they provide it for the students? How can bosses provide employees, young employees, youths, with these characteristics of a safe space, openness, lack of chastisement for expressing issues and all that, if the bosses themselves don't believe in this culture of safe space, or if they've not experienced it, right? So it's not only focusing on those people who experience the safe spaces, but also the professionals and the elites and the intelligentsia who create these safe spaces, right? Do they experience these safe spaces, for instance, right? So I hope that expanded a bit on your question.
Yeah, I did. Thank you so much. And that was brilliant. And yeah, I was right in my choice of panel members. So let's move on to Kevin. You're the founder of Convert Central, a podcast which aims to address the challenges and concerns faced by converts as well as the broader Muslim community in Singapore. So yeah, I myself am an avid follower of your podcast series. And I really enjoy the wide range of topics covered, ranging from gender relations to Ramadan etiquettes, etc. So yeah, in the course of the series, as well as your broader engagement with Islamic materials, right? Have you come across any Islamic hadith, narrations of the Prophet, or chapters from the Quran on mental health? Are there any that have left an impression on you?
Hello. Okay. We did a series on mental health before on Combat Central. I think one of the hadiths that spoke out to me was something that was shared by the Ustaz that was on the podcast. He said that there's no disease that Allah has created except that He has also created its treatment. So any challenge that we are faced with, be it mental health challenges, right? There's also a solution for it. But I think that gives a lot of hope for people in the community that are facing these problems, right? Sometimes what was shared on my table during discussion was that they think that there's no way out, right? So indeed there is a solution, or there is a for us to overcome these problems. I think that gives a lot of hope for people who are facing these challenges, right? One of the things that we come to understand after we have our discussions is that a lot of these mental health challenges that people face, they are quite intertwined with other aspects of life, right? So there goes the religious aspect also. It's also intertwined, right? And also in other areas, it's also stated that Allah says that He is to His servant what His servant thinks of Him, right? So there is also a kind of realm where if we place a lot of trust and reliance on God, if we see Him as one of the means that we get our salvation and our peace, right, and our mental health, right, there is a way that can translate to mental health as well, right? Physical health is also related to mental health, which is also related to spiritual health as well. Right, so if you tackle it in a holistic sense, I think these are the few hadiths that really speak out to me on how we should really treat and approach the challenge of mental health for our community.
All right, thank you, Ustaz Kevin. Yeah, that was awesome, and I hope it's been a fulfilling and meaningful journey for you as a convert. Yeah.
100%.
Okay. So Rushdie is next. He flew back to Singapore from Vietnam just to be with us here today. So if you spot a luggage somewhere, that probably belongs to him. As the co-founder of Reactor School, he has been working with various institutions in the APAC region to help students realize their entrepreneurial aspirations as well as ventures. So my question to you is, how can youth care for society through social entrepreneurship, particularly in helping to mitigate the impacts of mental health challenges among youth?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum everyone. Right, thanks so much for that question. Okay, I've got 2 quick points. One is that anyone here educators, teachers? Okay, so I think we also need to take care about the mental health of educators. I've been an educator myself, and sometimes it's really hard being sandwiched by both the student, the parent, the HOD, P, VP, and then you have higher HQ. So it really does start with leadership, and if leadership like the P or the principal of the school says like, yeah, this is something that we want to do for our students, and then cascades this down all the way to the educators, it really does help to build that safe mental space, and then educators know that I'm empowered to make sure that I have this honest conversation with my students. Right, so we were talking about social entrepreneurship, right? And even before we talk about that, I think the first things first is that what youths can do for each other is you should ask your peer, your friend, hey, do you want me to listen to you or do you want me to fix the problem? Because sometimes you just go straight into fixing the problem, but actually it's just about holding space. And actually there are quite a lot of new organizations, right? Like the Youth Mental Health Alliance, and then the various universities have their own befriender societies, or they have peer buddy programs, etc. And actually that's the first and most convenient way for any young student to be involved. Beyond that, if let's say you're looking at joining programs, right? Joining social enterprises or not-for-profits or VWO, one good place to look at is, for example, RAISE, right? The Singapore Centre for Social Enterprise. They've listed all the various social enterprises in Singapore, and you can go and select the ones which are related to mental health and volunteer with them. Right? Alternatively, you've got various other avenues like with MCCY, National Youth Council, Youth Corps Singapore, SCAPE. They even have their own, individual chapters. Chat, for example, right, where you can join as a befriender or join as a volunteer. So, if anyone here wants to volunteer in mental health space, especially social enterprises, let me know. I'm very happy to introduce you to them. Thank you very much.
Right, thanks for that. So let's move on to the second theme, okay, which is youth leadership. Question for Faris. Okay, some youths may perceive the board of certain CMOs as elitist, right? In view of the profile of the board members, who are mostly professionals. So how can we ensure greater class diversity in the leadership structures of CMOs?
Yeah, that's a very tough question. Thanks, Moira. Okay, so since this is a conference for Muslims, right? So let's go back to our Islamic tradition, right? So when we talk about Islam, the Deen, it's perfect, right? It is revealed, right? But there are also historical processes in place that affects, how we interpret Islam, how we live it out, how we contextualize it, and so on and so forth. So there's this book by a French thinker, I can't remember his name, but he wrote L'Islam de Marché, La Révolution Conservatrice, which basically means market Islam, right? The Islam of the market. So he was talking about how Islam in major developed countries are influenced by capitalist ethics, right? So For instance, the overemphasis on personal piety, rather than alleviating poverty or issues of social justice, which during the Prophet Muhammad's time, peace be upon him, was very pronounced, right? How the Prophet Muhammad, fought for issues with regard to social justice and so on and so forth. But we see, for example, the commodification of Islam. We see, for example, a class bias, we call it the middle class turn towards Islam, to the conservative turn of the middle class. So we have to be very aware of the political economy that we're in. So that's why we talk about class, right? How living in a political economy that is capitalistic affects our practice of Islam, right? That's one. And the other thing is, to go back to our Islamic tradition, when Prophet Muhammad was asked, who should we help? He said there were two groups of people we should help, al-zalim and mazlum, all right, al-mazlum. And basically, al-zalim means the oppressor, and mazlum means the oppressed, right? And when the person asked Prophet Muhammad, how do we help the oppressor? He said, help him by helping him to not oppress others, right? Now, in this issue where we have a certain class dominating leadership positions, one way of oppressing people from the lower socioeconomic statuses and lower classes, I hate to call it lower classes, but that's what it is, right? Lower socioeconomic statuses, by silencing them, by marginalizing them, right? That means we shut them from giving their voice at leadership platforms. Yeah, that's silencing and marginalizing. That's a form of oppression, actually. And why? Because one thinker from the global South, right? He talks about who owns poverty, right? We talk about poverty as a lack of money, but it's not, For example, a Nobel laureate, a woman Nobel laureate, I won't mention her name, you can do research, right? She talked about how poverty is also about the lack of political participation, lack of giving political voice, right? Because these poor people, what we're doing to them, for example, if you want to alleviate issues of poverty and inequality, is that we're basically saying that we own the discourse on poverty. Right? The haves own the discourse over the have-nots, right? And that's an issue, right? So you have to change our mindset. We have to think that, those who are trapped in vicious cycles of intergenerational poverty, the working poor, those who are working many hours, but they're still poor because of the meager salaries that they're earning, they have the expertise, they know what they're doing, right? They know how to solve their issues and problems, but we are not giving them the platform to talk about it, right? So this is a mindset shift you have to think about. So, you can start small, a lot of times you look at the government and organizations, right? But in your schools, if you're students, right? Do you have class diversity in your school organizations? Right, start small. Be the change makers to have a cultural shift, right? Don't be the al-zalim who tell the poor uskut, be silent. Yeah. So that's what I can say. Thank you.
Oh, that sounds very comprehensive and insightful. So we have an ustaz, an intellectual thinker, a social entrepreneur. Okay, amazing. My panel is complete. Right. I lost my train of thoughts. Kevin, you're next. We have discussed at length, right, the value of appointing women as well as youth of various educational backgrounds to the board of CMOs, but not that of ethnic minorities within these organizations. So the Muslim community, as I said, is not homogeneous. It is also made up of people from different ethnic backgrounds, including Chinese Muslims like yourself and also Indian Muslims. So in your opinion, what is the value of appointing young minorities within the Muslim community to the board of Malay Muslim organizations?
I think the fact that when you have a board that is comprised of a lot of different ethnicities, right? You get a lot of people coming from different backgrounds, different upbringing, different values, and that really gives a lot of options to the board, right? I like growing up in Singapore, you don't really expect your upbringing to be very different from the guy across the room, because Singapore is pretty homogeneous, I would say, in our society and community growing up. But even coming subsequently then as a convert, as a Muslim, Chinese Muslim convert, and going into Muslim organizations, right, you start to realize that there's a lot of things that I can contribute because of my background as growing up as a Chinese. The values that I hold, the things that I see from my perspective because of my upbringing. And I think that's just one guy, like coming from a Chinese background. Imagine the diversity that we have in Singapore. We have a lot of Indian Muslims, we have a lot of Filipino Muslims, right? If we can ensure the substantial level of kind of diversity on the board level, we open up so many options for our leaders to choose, right? And that's also kind of the responsibility of a board to ensure that we make the right choice by considering all options. But you are unable to be aware if you're not able to get enough people to open up these options for us, right? Perhaps the question that we need to ask is that how then do we do it, right? Personally, I think it's through the system, right? Beyond just appointing people, we need to have a system to groom people, to select people, right? To ensure that there's succession, right? Beyond just finding a very bright spot, a bright light in the community. Okay, let's appoint him or her to the board, right? We can do better, and eventually it will sort itself out in the sense where if we do things right, if we have a right system, right, the proportion of males to females, the proportion of races in a board, it will eventually go to a level where it's suitable for the community, right? When we're talking about the ideal level, is it 50-50, is it 70-30? We don't have the right answers right now, but eventually if we have the right tools and the right systems, I think it will sort itself out.
Okay, thank you. Right, are you all happy with that answer? Okay. So let's move on to Rushdie. You serve on the board of many youth organizations, right? And you're also a member of MCCY's Singapore Youth Action Panel. So for the benefit of youths out there who may be aspiring to board or to board leadership but may not be familiar with the pathways to board appointment, could you share with us what it takes to be a board member?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. I think first things first is that you've got to understand what kind of board you're joining for and what reasons, yeah. There are different types of boards. There are voluntary boards. There are, you could be an independent board member of a startup or, for MNC, etc. And I think what underlies everything is what your niyat is. Why exactly do I want to join this board, right? Am I here to boost up my resume? Am I here, to get paid board fees? Or, do I really fit with the values and the mission of this organization? And do I feel like, I really want to do something about it? There's the whole concept of, positive deviance, right? Very good at complaining, but I really want to complain and then do something about it. And then maybe the best way for me to do this is through a board. And sometimes a board may not be the best way for you to contribute. There are other ways. So aspiring to be a board member, to be completely honest, was never something that I wanted to do. I kena arrow. Yeah, you kena arrow when someone puts you into a WhatsApp group and then you cannot leave the WhatsApp group. And then like every few weeks, every few months, like, hey, can you help with this? Can you help with that, etc. So most of the board positions I am with right now are either with startups or with not-for-profits or VWOs, right? And then the question is, what can you help this organization with? So for me, when I'm with the voluntary welfare organizations, my role is to help them make money. That's what I do in my day job, right? Either raise money from venture capital, philanthropists, family officers, or make money, try to figure out how to create revenue. And there's this phrase by Walt Disney which I like, right? Which is that we don't make movies to make money, we make money so that we can make more movies. I think this is something that also Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam mentioned, which is, you should try to be an organization that is well endowed, that has wealth, and then what you do with that wealth is really important. So my recommendation, right, to any youths here want to join voluntary boards? Okay, another one. Anyone here serving on voluntary boards? Okay, please go up to the people, right? Ask them how they did it also, because they can also share with you their point of view and how they were arrowed to join the board and got added into a WhatsApp group that they cannot leave. All right, but a few things. One is turn up and then follow up. Right, so the fact that if you're at this place here and if you want to volunteer with AMP or any of the other, CMOs here, right, Kevin's organization, turn up, follow up, and say, hey, I'm interested to find out more. What can I do to learn? Be interested and be interesting. I think that's the first thing. Number two is, spend less time on TikTok and more time on LinkedIn. Yeah, I've actually got really interesting job offers or board advisory roles via LinkedIn. Because, the stuff that you do there, right, shows that, you're really interested in youth entrepreneurship. Maybe you can talk about how we can help the many Muslims here who are interested in gig jobs, right, who want to find additional income to, and stuff like that. Or, most recently for Forward SG, we have something called the Equip Panel, right? We're looking at helping youth from disadvantaged backgrounds, right, for social mobility. And why am I helping with that? Because I work with a lot of schools in Southeast Asia, and I've seen interesting best practices, right, in Vietnam, in Indonesia, with regard to social enterprise, with regard to social mobility. So what can we learn from our peers in Southeast Asia that we can apply back here? So after you have your LinkedIn profile, you can also think about what kind of angle or value can I provide to the board, right? So for example, with SCAPE, I was with the HR subcommittee because I was with the Institute for HR Professionals. And before that, when I was with this organization, public agency, I was in human capital. So I've always been interested in youth development and HR. So yeah, maybe this is something that I can do for the youths. So try to stick to something that you're not interested in, but something excited about. Because being on the board, most of the time they don't pay if it's a voluntary board, all right? It's a lot of work, right? And you have that responsibility. So inshallah, if your niyat is good, you will do well for the organization.
All right, thank you. Yeah, that's very inspiring. Thanks for sharing. Can we get Farisha on board? She'll be joining us. Online. Farisha, are you there? So Farisha is in the US right now because she's having her exams for her MBA. So we wish her all the best. Is she already online? She is? Okay. So we'll only be listening to her voice, okay? So my question to her is, from her experience, right, what are some of the manifestations of androcentrism or examples of patriarchy within CMOs? So can we get her answers?
So I think we've spoken a lot about what some of those examples look like. But a big one for me is the fact that we're not seeing women on these boards, right? And one of the reasons for that, shared by a board member we interviewed, was that women are not making themselves available or seen. And I really wanted to discuss that. So the nature of CMOs or community organizations is that they're voluntary, which means that on top of work, on top of school, you are volunteering your time. And we live in a society where women are often having to juggle more responsibilities than men. Women go to work, come home, and address matters at home with their husbands, parents, children. Women are mothers, caregivers, wives, and sometimes all at once. And these conditions make it really hard for women to volunteer their time in CMOs because they simply don't have enough of it. So what can be done? I think for CMOs, the first step should be to recognize and acknowledge the structural inequalities that limit women from volunteering. And secondly, they should take concrete action to ensure equal participation in their boards so that they make decisions that are most reflective of the communities they serve, a lot of whom are women. So for example, saying something like, I want you to be on our board, but I understand that you may have a lot going on at home. But we really still value your input. So if you need to take this meeting at home, please feel free to do so. Little things like this make a world of difference because it enables women to contribute and to lead. And I think this would be a good start for the way forward.
Okay, thanks so much, Farisha. We really miss you. I really wish you were here. So I guess it's now time for Q&A. I shall now open the floor for questions, which will be addressed by our panel members. This is a great opportunity for you to hear from them. So I shall not abuse my position as moderator by answering the questions. You may either raise your hand. There's a mic in the middle of the room. And you can also post your question in Slido. Kindly note that we will only take questions related to the two themes. And please keep your questions concise. Before raising your questions, we would like you to introduce yourself, tell us your name, the organization you're from, and who the question is meant for. All right. So Can we get the first question, please?
Don't everybody raise your hands at once.
Yeah, or probably some of you may have posted on Slido. Just give me a second. We'll try to assess the questions. Really, no questions? So whatever we've said is something that you all agree with? Okay, Haziq, yes. Would you like to come to the front?
Okay, hello. My name is Azik. Okay, my question is quite open for all three of you to answer. So, just now, Rushdi actually mentioned about how, like, when someone wants to talk about their problems, it's either they need a listening ear or, like, they need a solution to their problem, right? But the problem now is why isn't this being emphasized in school, regardless whether secondary school or tertiary or uni? Because based on my experience, like they when a student try to voice out their issues, okay, the counselors tend to involve people, like for example parents or even like teachers. Okay, so how like shouldn't this be a concern within the counselors? Like they should know their limit whether they should involve this kind of people or not. Because after all, the point of a counselor when they first have their first session with the counselor, they will always say that whatever says between both of them will stay between both of them, and also the fact that like they will only involve external parties if it's life or death situation. Thank you.
Thanks, Haziq, for the question. Would anyone of you like
Faris,
to
you want to share a bit more first?
answer that?
Okay. Thank you so much, Haziq. I'm sighing because like it's such a complex question.
Where to start, right?
Where to start? Yeah, where to start?
Some of this is being recorded also.
Yeah, how do you know? The camera is like looking at me, like panopticon like that.
Okay, let me jump in very quickly, right? Because I work with a lot of educators, and I must profess that I cannot state this on behalf of MOE or other educators, right? This is my personal opinion, and I've also been an educator before. The difficulty actually lies in accountability. It's always about like, what if? Alamak, what if I never report this to my HOD and then something happens to the kid? Or alamak, what if I never tell the parent and something happens to the kid? And that fear actually drives a lot of decision making, right? In our hierarchical process, because we have been trained for efficiency. But because we have trained for efficiency, we forget to be human. Sometimes what people want is someone to say like, hey, actually, I also went through something like that. I can empathize with you, I feel you. Rather than have a checklist and like, oh, this is the SOP, if this, then that, else that, right? So we are conditioned for that. And I feel that the best people who can relate with other peers are your peers themselves. And that's why I always advocate for, when you meet for someone and he's going through a tough time, just listen to them first before trying to fix them. Because sometimes the last thing you do is to fix them and then it actually pushes them over. Yeah, okay, now we can have the more formal response.
Okay, yeah, thanks a lot, Rushdi, for saving me because I need to like PC my answer. Okay, so not that PC, but I mean, I know the government is trying to do structural changes to address mental health issue holistically in schools. I myself worked as a youth policy officer before in the government, before my present life right now as a master's student and teaching assistant, educator at NUS. So we are aware of these issues in the government, but the problem is how do you like what Rushdi said, right? How do you create structures of accountability? Number one, and number two is also you have to. So whenever I'm in the government and we have like policy meetings, right? I was a youth policy officer, and then after that I was an education policy officer, and then we try to like tell hey, permanent secretary, like these let's always remember that these are not numbers, these are humans, right? So we tend to look at stats and data analysis and all that, but these numbers are human, right? And that's what Rushdi is trying to get at, right? Dehumanization of the process, right? That's why we do design thinking as well, a kind of like qualitative approach, right? Rather than a statistical approach, because the statistical approach doesn't work very well to humanize and empathize and have some compassion, interpretation, nuance, right? In that sense. So we shouldn't blame the counselors or the teachers because, honestly, teachers, the measures, right? Yeah, I mean, Rushdie has shared about educators' struggles and all that. The measures for like keeping teachers, right? The attrition rates, for instance, for MOE, burnout amongst teachers and all that. These are like structural issues that affect them. And we know that these kind of issues actually affect decision making because the teachers have to make a lot of decisions throughout the day, and we call it decision fatigue. It's a psychological concept, so you make a lot of decisions, you get decision fatigue. Right? Poor people also have it. They have to make a lot more decisions than you and I. For instance, they have to really think about how to spend their money, whereas we can just buy a bubble tea, right? But they have to really budget, They have to think a lot more than us. And they have to do a lot of chores that we outsource to, perhaps, for those of you who have domestic helpers, right? They have to do that on their own, right? So all these issues, like how to support teachers and counselors from experiencing burnout themselves so that they can make proper judgment and proper ethical decisions. This is about ethics, not about protocol, like what Rushdie said. So in the civil service, we always joke that the what do you call it? The Bible of the civil service is the
red color book, is it?
No, that's Mao Zedong. Oh my God. See, I left my civil service pass behind. But anyway, it's instruction. What is it? My friend? Oh yeah, public service, yeah. The instruction manual for the civil service, right? There's an instruction manual. Yeah. Sorry, what is it? I am, yeah, instruction manual, right? I am, something like instruction manual, right? So it's the Bible, right? So civil service just like bureaucrats, right? Just follow the protocol, cover,
Yeah. Can I just also make a point for...
Yeah.
The official term for our teachers is not teacher. It's called education officer. Right? And if you understand it from that point of view, you can now understand why teachers sometimes are super overworked. Because I'm not just teaching, I've got a whole bunch of other things to do. And in all honesty, right, when you have to teach according to a scheme of work, SOW, it's very, very hard for the teachers to also have that empathy for typically 120 students, right? Because if there are 40 students and they take 3 classes, for example. So my take is that it's very hard for us to just rely on educators. It's also unfair to them, kasihan. But what we can do as a community, right, is what other support can we do ground up? Peers, right, other not-for-profit organizations, welfare organizations, groups, so that we make sure that these students always have someone to turn to. Kalau it's not my teacher, then someone else, right? Maybe it's a peer, maybe it's a friend of a friend, some other role model, right? And there were a lot of fantastic role models at my table, sharing us all the things about what we can do just to embrace the failure of some of our youths, rather than always just prejudging them. Because the moment you're judging them, they're like, sudahlah, why do I want to tell you all my problems, right? Because I'm going to get scolded again, right? So building that safe space, I think, is the really hard part, and doing it ground up.
Yeah, so that goes to the second, thanks, Rushi. That goes to the second point I want to talk about, because I was talking about how teachers experience all these sociological factors that stress them, counselors as well. So how do we create a system where it's holistic and doesn't only involve the teachers, right? So for instance, like IMH is aware of this, the government is aware of this. So they make, for example, peer support specialists, right? People who have experienced mental health issues and they train themselves to be peer support specialists. The other one is we are encouraging young people like yourselves to take up courses to be para-counselors, right? So you can kind of like have a peer-to-peer kind of support. Let's say your friend is in distress, there is a peer-to-peer support. There is a horizontal mechanism, right, for you to kind of like support your friend in distress. All right, so these are very important structural issues that we have to implement, so that we don't only rely on teachers who might be teachers and counselors who might be suffering due to certain structural factors that they face on their own. 2 things: compassion fatigue and decision fatigue. Right, like what Rushdie said, they are general education officers. My teacher friends always tell me, my general education officer friends always tell me, it's 80 to 90% admin and event planning and all that kind of thing. It's 10% teaching, Yeah, so that's the issue lah. Yeah, thanks for the question.
Yeah, I hope that answers your question, Haziq. Very comprehensive, right? Okay, so I shall take questions from Slido. There's one that goes, youth are pressured to chase Singapore's definition of success, which can lead to mental health issues. So how should we redefine success? What would be a revised version of success look like?
Okay, So let me take this question. So, you know, when we have like definitions of success, that's what I said, right? Success, what is success as a Muslim? Right? Think about it. Or what is success as a good human being? Outside of the capitalist rat race. Right? I earlier talked about how, you know, the book, L'Islam de Marché, right? How capitalist ethics have influenced Muslims around the world, from developed countries especially, to have a kind of capitalistic understanding of success in this life, right? So accumulation of wealth, personal piety for personal salvation, right? You know, there's nothing wrong with that. You should actually focus on your own personal stuff, but there's a public element to Islam as well, a social justice element, right? So that's one thing, right? How do we define success? So if you want to redefine success, what you have to do is simply look back at your own traditions, right? You don't come, you know, cultural alienation is a problem that we face in Malaysia, Singapore, Brunei, not so much Indonesians, right? Indonesians, they are very proud of their culture. A lot of them speak Javanese, the youth. In fact, they have like the whole kearifan lokal. Suddenly, Indonesian Indonesian come out. Kearifan lokal, which means local wisdom. Yeah, so they are trying to set up a new university to kind of like export their own version of Islam, which is the Nusantara Islam, right? Which is outside of capitalist Islam. So they have social science discourse, humanities discourse in their study of theology and all that in Indonesia. So that's all and well. But we have cultural alienation as a problem amongst youth in, amongst the Malays and even the Indian Muslims, right? So for instance, any Indian Muslims here? Are you aware of Muinuddin, the Sufi saint? Muinuddin, who was termed the saint of the poor? No? So he's in your Indian Muslim tradition, right? So he said, for instance, that you know, the highest form of devotion is the alleviation of distress, poverty, feeding the poor, and so on and so forth. So that's in the Indian Muslim tradition, right? We have Sufi saints in the past who say these kind of things, right? So closer to home, to my home, I mean, I'm Malay, right? So in your Malay traditions, right, you have a choice, you know. In your Malay past, how you define success was how feudal you were, how you mengampu kepada raja-raja, yeah, how you suck up to the kings, and some of them were brutal kings, zalim, right? And do you want that kind of success? You suck up to power, to be powerful, so that you can, you know, just for the sake of power. So that's the feudal tradition. And you know, in the Sejarah Melayu, the Sulalatul Salatin, right, which is like a very feudal text, you know, so they use Islam to justify the oppression of the feudal kings against the masses. Right, that's one tradition in the Malay Muslim tradition. The other tradition that we have is what we call the ethico-moral dimension of Islam, or Islamic humanism. Humanism, not atheism, but Islamic humanism. We call it ethico-moral Sufism in some circles. So it's like, you know, we can see it in classical texts, right? Tajus Salatin, for instance, right? Where the text is about how kings have as a Muslim, they have a responsibility to enact social justice amongst the population. That's another tradition. All right, so we have the Muslim tradition and the feudal tradition. But now we have, the problem is we have another tradition more emerging, which is a neoliberal capitalist tradition, which you are all facing. Right? So you're Muslims, but we are stuck, right, in this neoliberal capitalist ideology of success, right? Of defining success as the accumulation of wealth, profession, status, and so on and so forth. Now, is this part of, you know, our Islamic tradition? I don't think so, you know.
Yeah, and speaking about orang zalim, and when you're 15 and homework and your teacher scolds you, right? Sometimes you actually feel very powerless, right? So, you know, I was thinking back, right, for our young people, why do they feel very stressed, and what is this success thing? And actually, it's about self-agency, because when you're still very young, number one, everything is told you this is what needs to be done. It's very hard for you to deviate, because if you do, you fall off the cracks. People judge you for it. And what I've been trying to do, and I've been doing all this while, is helping students to be comfortable with uncertainty. If all of a sudden you don't have just one measure of success, and you're supposed to define your own ruler of success that is yours, right? How do you do that, right? Can you own it? So that's why we try to get students to be comfortable with uncertainty, and we bring them through, some sort of entrepreneurial program. So school teaches you a type of thinking called causal reasoning. 1 + 1 = blank. But when you graduate into this thing called life, you use a different type of thinking called effectual reasoning. Blank plus blank = 1. You know where you want to be, there are laws and frameworks that you have to follow, plus, minus, times, divide. But all of a sudden, there's no one right answer to get there. So the first things first is that for this young person, do I want 1 or 2 or 0.5 or whatever? It's up to me to decide what my end goal is. Right? And do we give our young people enough space for them to decide what they want to be successful at? And then now they figure out that, you know what, I actually want to be really good at theatre, or I want to be really, really good at something else. There are multiple ways to get there, which sometimes my biochem maths econs, thing in JC is not going to help me get there. Or if, for example, I've gotten into a certain course that my L1 R5 doesn't get me into, how am I going to get there? Stress, right? So if you have that, if you don't give them that sense of self-agency and you don't allow them to define themselves and you don't support them, it's very, very difficult. And that's why, I've been trying to advocate for this, and it has to be bottom-up as well. So parents being supportive, peers, and one of the things I really, really try to do is to get parents as well as alumni to always come back like, hey, you know what, actually I did this course in theatre and now I'm doing this. Or I did this course in architecture, I'm not studying architecture anymore, but I'm successful something else. So this is the concept of social proof. If I see my koko, my cece, my abang, my kakak doing something, I feel like, hey, you know what, actually maybe I can do that too. And that's something that I think we should do more of. So for those of you guys, if you're not going back to your secondary school or your JC, etc., I would definitely recommend you to, right? It is possible for you to serve on the board of your primary school or your secondary school or your JC, right? Reach out to the principal and say like, yeah, I think we want to start this, etc. Yeah.
Yeah, just to add on, going back to how you have autonomy and all that. So that is one thing, right? So it's kind of semi-feudal that you have to be stuck in a kind of like authoritarian climate where you feel that it's authoritarian, where people define for you success, right? So if you are, you have the Islamic tradition of humanism, for instance, you will stress on your own agency and autonomy. You will think autonomously, right? How you wanna have success. Of course, based on our universal values of Islam. And this is an issue that, like Rushdie said, which is very structural. I can tell you that the government has moved on, right? They have moved on. They are trying to redefine success and all that kind of thing because it's just not working, right? So they redefine PSLE, you can critique it or whatever, but they're trying to move away from grades, right? For instance, like primary school, no more, right? There's more teachers, no more exams, right? For certain primary school levels, right? And then, for instance, normal technical kids can go straight to ITE now, right? If I'm not wrong. So the government is moving on, but it's a cultural shift that's going to take a long time. It's going to take a long time if you don't enact that cultural shift, yeah, and you don't pressure the powers that be, whoever that may, I won't say who, to hurry up with the structural changes, yeah. The other thing is that I just like to tell you all to branch out to what, like for example, Rushdie is doing, which is entrepreneurship, which is a huge thing that we are lacking in our community, right? Entrepreneurs, business, and all that kind of thing. Academics, intellectuals like Dr. Humaira, also lacking, right? As well as theatre people. Cikgu Muhammad Latif just passed away. He wrote an influential book for me. I read it years ago, Batas Langit. People, authors, like you want to be a penulis writer, go ahead, be a writer, right? They also influence and change the masyarakat, the society, yeah?
Okay, thank you so much, guys. I won't be surprised if you get a lot of invitations for guest lectures later. Let's take more questions from the audience here. This gentleman here. Please tell us your name, the organization you're from, and yeah.
I don't like to be video, but anyway, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I don't really have a question, but I need to register my concern. For instance, about success. I mean, the question was to do with success in Islam, but the answer was not that. Actually, the answer is staring at us. Every azan, hayal salah, hayal falah. Falah is actually one of the meaning of salah. Falah. One idea, there are many terms actually for success in Arabic. One of it is falah. So really it's not your question, your answer, I mean, it's a bit, you know, it reflects some kind of confusion. But what does that mean? That means that, okay, your success hinges on not just prayer in the sense of prayer, because we understand salah is actually servitude. Your success actually hinges upon how well are you a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is why Rasulullah SAW, okay, is given the title Abduhu wa Rasuluh. People don't understand this. He is the best servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That makes him successful.
Yeah,
So
thank
for
you so
us,
much.
it's that also. So this is very important. I think we, you know, all this, it's like, I'm an academician myself. You know, I have a PhD, I've got a master's degree also. But you know, all these things, you know, doesn't really answer. And the framework seems to be incongruent in sometimes.
Thank you so much.
You know?
We really appreciate the very diverse perspectives here.
Yeah. So I think we need to understand that. But I've got another point. Actually, I've got a lot of points, but I'm going to give you one more only, if I may.
Please stick to the theme on mental health or youth leadership.
Yeah, okay. It's on mental health. You see, it is asked just now about mental health in the Quran. And then the answer, Brother Kevin, was this Ustad saying that for all sickness there is a cure. That doesn't tell us much about mental health itself, yeah, in the Quran. As a matter of fact, the whole paradigm is incongruent, because in Islam, we don't talk about mental health, not because we ignore mental health, but in the Quran, it's not framed in that way. In the Quran, it is framed in terms of qalb, which is the heart, and the nafs. So this is a big issue, because once you frame from that perspective, you are adopting a Western worldview and Western perspective and framework. But if you take an Islamic framework and worldview and perspective, you will find, for instance, in Surah Shams, okay, it is mentioned about nafs. A'udzu billahi rajim, bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Wa nafsi wa ma sawaha, fa alhamaha fujuraha wa taqwaha. Qad aflaha man zakkaha wa qad khaba man dassaha. Now that one really tell you, okay, and I don't want to go into it because I teach this course. I teach course on Islamic psychology before. And I'm in this area, I'm in the area of Sufism also. So we have to be careful, because we want to look at it from the Islamic perspective fully and clearly. Okay?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, thanks for sharing.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, okay, we'll take that point. So in the interest of time, we'll take two more questions, one from Slido and another from the lady over here. Let's start off with Slido. So perhaps this is a question that Kevin and Farisha might want to answer. So, yeah, my favorite question. How can men already at directors or board level act as allies to get female Muslim leaders more involved? Yeah.
Okay. Hello. I think before I go into that question, I'd like to add on to what Brother was sharing. I think the points that you brought up, they are very applicable, and these points should be taken into consideration as well, right? Like, as you've mentioned, when we look at mental health in Islam as well, right? It's not phrased as mental health in the entire history of Islam. That is not how it is viewed for our scholars and across the course of Islamic history as well, right? And one thing about tackling it nowadays is then how then do we contextualize it to our community, knowing that there's Islamic scholarship backing the way that we treat and tackle these issues, but it's also circular ways propagated by Western society on how we can treat it, right? And then hence our responsibility here is to either find a middle ground where we can benefit from both, right? But if you were not to do it, if you don't try, right, then that would be saying that most of the time we either go one or the other. We see that nowadays we either go one or the other. There isn't a lot of places offering both Islamic counseling as well as secular counseling, right? So I think that's a very valid point that should be taken into consideration as well. It doesn't contradict anything that was shared. I think this is a good point that is good nuance to add in. With regards to the point on success, one of the things that was mentioned by Ustaz Firdaus Yahya in how Islam defines success or masculinity or femininity for us Muslims is not by our society's way of benchmarking people, right? We see like men being alpha, shooting guns, wearing sunglasses as masculinity, right? But in Islam, how we define success for being a male and a female is how well are you able to fulfill the roles that Allah has given to you. If you're a man, what are the roles that you have, the responsibilities that you have? Being a son, being a husband, being a bread maker of the family. What about for a female? The more you're able to be capable of fulfilling these roles, the more masculine or feminine you are, the more successful you are as a man and as a woman, right? So what this means is that at different parts of your life, right, you play different roles. Someday you'll be a husband, someday you'll be a father, right? And that means that across your life, you have different measures of success, right? So what Faris and also Rushdie shared is that they've kind of shared tools for you to continuously reevaluate yourself, to continuously learn, to be open to change. And these are things that allow you to kind of course your way through life, understanding that there will be change, but we must have a guide. And that for us, alhamdulillah, that's Islam, right? And that should be a guiding principle in how we should navigate our lives. Together with, at the same time, it's a huge task. We have to contextualize it in our society. We have to do it. There's no choice. We're in Singapore, right? So that's that. Honestly, for directorship and female inclusivity in leadership, I won't really have a lot of experiences to share. But I think going back to what I shared earlier, just a quick one, right, before I hand it to either the two abangs I have on my left and my right, we should use religion as a guiding principle, once again, right? Look at the instances where the Prophet ﷺ has deferred to the people around him who were females. One of the examples is at the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, right, where they were said, you cannot make your pilgrimage. You have traveled all this way. It's a long trip. Still, you have to slaughter whatever sacrificial animals that came with you, all the way from Medina, and give it to the people of Mecca. And the companions, when they heard that, they were shattered, and they couldn't believe that this was coming from the Prophet ﷺ. They was so in disbelief of the situation that they didn't move. This is the first time in his entire prophethood that nobody moved when he gave that instruction or that advice. So the Prophet ﷺ never encountered something like this. Then he went to his wife to ask for advice. What then should I do? Right? His wife said, you do whatever you have said, and then they will follow. So he did exactly that. And then the companions started one by one to start killing their animals and sacrificing them and giving the meat to the enemy. Right? So when you take references like this, you understand that there are different roles that women can play in our community. Right? And then you integrate them into your community. And that's how you kind of create a system, a perfect system that has been given to us by Islam, and kind of benefit the community in that way.
Right, thanks, Kevin. I can see that a lot of people here are taking notes as you were speaking. So, yeah, I'm glad that it has sort of turned this into a lecture, a mini lecture. Okay, does Rushdie have anything to add?
Assalamualaikum. This is a really hard question, right? And I'm trying to think through how exactly I'm going to phrase it. Like, personally for me, it's not about inviting ladies to sit on the board just for the sake of it. You get what I mean, right? It's about, I don't even want to use the word inclusive. That's probably not the right word. It's about being aware and being conscious and being mindful that bring about competent ladies to join the board adds so much more value to your board, right? And I say this for someone where half my team are ladies and half my angel investors are also ladies, right? And I think it really begins with leadership. It's about understanding that, hey, you know what? There are people out there who can give differing points of view, better counsel, and they happen to be ladies. And it's your job as a leader to seek that out and include. And it's really what you do on a daily basis in the company or in the organization of VWO to make sure that these ladies are appreciated and heard, and you ascribe to them the honor and respect that they deserve.
Okay, I may have
it's very hard for me to
alternative viewpoint, which I'm going to share during the panel presentation. You have anything to add, Faris?
Thank you thank you so much, Professor, for your giving us clarity and all that. So I do fully agree with you with the fact that success in Islam is of course how we become servants of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. And definitely, I think I appreciate your discourse on Islamic psychology as well. I'm aware of works by our esteemed Professor Syed Nakib Alatas, as well as Ismail Faruqi and all that, that discourse which is pioneered in Malaysia and all that, how you change, his books on metaphysics of the prolegomena of metaphysics of Islam and secularism, and how we should, look at our Islamic tradition for concepts. But I guess we don't touch on these because a lot of the Singaporean youth are not familiar with it. So thank you very much for adding that perspective. It's very useful.
Right, we'll take one last question from the lady over here.
Assalamualaikum. My name is Nusaiba and I'm from Young Samra. So we talk about, the competence of youth being leaders, holding leadership positions, but then we'll take a step back, and think about what is the process to build that competence. So I would like to, hear your sharing on what are your thoughts on the tarbiyah of our Muslim youth in Singapore. What can we do more regarding the youth development scene in Singapore, while integrating Islamic values and knowledge so that, they'll be rooted and proud Muslims giving back to the community while also soaring higher. So maybe for on the ground efforts, I'd like to hear from Kevin, but for more of top down, maybe Faris and Rushdie. Thank you.
Once again, I'd like to share that I'm happy to be just sitting up here basking in the knowledge and wisdom of my abangs. But on the ground side, I think I've attended a few FGDs by MQ and Mendaki before, where they kind of are asking us. I'm a participant in the Muslim Society in my university, right? How do we get youth to be more engaged in the activities at the masjid, right? And I think I hold quite a contrarian view in the sense where we have to understand again the role that youth have to play. Right? So in Islam, then we go back to our reference again. How did youth kind of work up to that leadership, right? Because we have a lot of capable leaders in our Islamic tradition. And if we want them to get back to where they were, then we have to look at what brought them to where they were, right? So you start to realize that in Islamic tradition, youth typically at a very young age, 5 and above, when they start to understand, get maturity and everything, they aren't tasked to do leadership at its peak. They are not tasked to be directors. They are not tasked to be project directors on an event, things like this. They are more focused on learning leadership from their peers, and more often than not, their seniors and the leaders of the community. But I think what we are doing in our community nowadays is that once someone hits 12 years old, they go secondary school, then come to the masjid, we're going to give you leadership opportunities. But what about the learning opportunities before that? Right, we need to kind of take reference from the Islamic tradition, Islamic history, I think, to kind of build youth up to that level where they're able to lead competently. Which is not nowadays, if nowadays we realize that, for myself, I'm from SMU, and there are 101 clubs in SMU. They have a lot of presidents and vice presidents. But you start to realize that a lot of these presidents and vice presidents, granted they are not Muslims, but they are actually lacking on a lot of different levels when it comes to leadership, even though they are accorded this title, right? But then you ask, is it the title that makes you a leader, or is it because you're a leader, that's why you're given the title itself, right? So I think on the ground level, it is for organizations or even for the current leaders to understand that we have to build up our youth, right? Not by just plainly giving them these leadership opportunities, but allowing them to learn from what we are doing, shadow them, and taking just as a reference, right? The Prophet ﷺ became a prophet at the age of 40, right? And most of the time, the leaders aren't pushed to go to the peak of leadership unless they are ready, and that's for me, I think.
Yeah, so the context is that I work with a lot of student clubs, right, and youth organizations, and I think there are 3 things I want to share. The first is KM, knowledge management. A lot of the student clubs, organizations I work with, have a lot of tacit knowledge that they don't put down pen and paper. So a lot of things are lost, or there's no SOP, or very difficult, for them to pass on knowledge. Which brings on the second point, which is succession planning. So a lot of times the leaders of these student organizations will change presidents, and then 2 presidents down when I meet them, I'm like, why are we making the same mistakes that were made 3-4 years ago? Because that knowledge is not passed down, whether it's through anecdotes, etc. The third thing is alumni engagement. After the presidents leave, don't let them go. Put them in a WhatsApp group so they can't run away, and then keep asking them for help. So it always passes down this knowledge from the seniors to the juniors, right? And then finally, the fourth thing that I wanted to share is inter-organizational learning. So learning from peers, not just within your groups. So let's say you're one Muslim society, learning from another Muslim society, but learning best practices outside as well. Are there other groups or organizations that you can find useful best practices? And then put that into your KM, and then share it and make sure that it goes down from one leadership to another.
Yeah, so thank you for the very difficult question. I'll be very concise and brief. So just 2 points. The first point is that definitely we will in order for us to you used a good word tarbiyah, right? And Professor Said Naikab Alatas, who started the whole thing about how we should look at the concepts in our Islamic tradition. He gave a definition of education, which I think could be applicable. We can look it up. So it's about the proper placing of things in nature and all that. But to have these kind of ideas, right, we have to have intellectual discourse, like intellectual critical discourse, right? And that's lacking. So you have to create your own intellectual critical discourse, combining the social sciences and humanities, sciences, engineering, and so on and so forth, with our Islamic tradition, right, with our religious knowledge. And that's what MUIS is trying to do with the Asatiza, trying to educate the Asatiza who are graduating, who are going through the postgraduate certificate in Islam and contemporary societies. Oh my God, that's a mouthful, right? So PCICS program, trying to get them to get to know about social science concepts and all that. So that's at one level. At the other level, it's really about, how you kind of like what Rushdie mentioned, kind of expand your social capital. Because as you can see, we're talking about Muslim issue, but it'll benefit us to hear from non-Muslims, yeah, because they have professional capacities and resources that we don't have. Basically we don't have that amount of professional capacities and resources, right? So learning from them, wisdom is the property of wisdom wherever it is found is a property of the believer, right? Wherever wisdom is found, whatever intellectual tradition or religious tradition there is, right? If it's wisdom, if it's beneficial to our community, we can take it as long as it doesn't go against our core Islamic principles, right? So that's just 2 points that I can talk about. Thank you very much.
Okay, yeah, thanks everyone. Shall we give them a round of applause? Yeah, as much as I would love to continue the discussion, it's now time for our lunch break. So we would like to thank everyone for your participation, and we hope that you will stay with us until the end of the event. Our panelists will be hanging around if you would like to have a chat with them. I saw that some of you had specific questions for them. Yeah, too many in fact. So many that they could start forming their own fan clubs. So before we go for our break, shall we take a group photo? Perhaps gather somewhere there. Shall we?
Or do you want to just ask the cameras, thank you, and then?
Okay. So you guys just stay put, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll just sit there.
All right. That works as well.